All right. Welcome back. This is On the Fringe. I'm Gavin, and this is
This is Dave. How's everybody doing? Thanks for checking in. We're still alive on the fringe.
On the Fringe.
So,
So,
before we jump into this, I want to go ahead and say a quick thank you for checking us out. Thanks for listening to our podcast. And if you like it, be sure to pass it on to somebody that you like. And if you don't like it, pass it on to all of your enemies. I'm sure they will get a kick out of it and our numbers will go up. So, we've had a little bit of a spark so far, but Gavin, you can take it from here.
lots of smoke, no fire.
So, we would appreciate all of the help. Please get our numbers up. And we are enjoying making this, and we hope you guys are enjoying listening to us, even if it is just a bunch of smoke
And not a lot
so
of
far.
fire. Speaking of which, before we get into the meat of the episode today, all this talk about fire is making me think about one of my adoptive homelands, which is Portugal, which is just sort of struggling out of some very serious wildfire business over the last couple of weeks, and are struggling with the fact that a lot of these fires seem to have been started intentionally. And the story around the campfire is that they were started by firefighting supply salesmen who were suffering from a bit of a dry season because it had been raining all summer and needed to offload their equipment in a hurry and were apparently paying people to start fires. So that's the sort of gossip of the day from Portugal. Um,
And I guess the whole point to your message, Gavin, is if you have a dry spell, bad things can happen.
this is the family podcast, Dave. But yes. Oh boy.
All right.
On that note, what are we talking about today, Dave?
So we are going to be talking about something that's a much lighter note than fires. We're going to be talking about our Peace Corps experience. So, Peace Corps is something that a lot of people have heard about and maybe actually have never met or talked with a Peace Corps volunteer. And Gavin and I were both Peace Corps volunteers in Indonesia. We served together in the same cohort. We're going to talk a little bit about our experience and about what Peace Corps actually does. And hopefully, we can show you guys something about Peace Corps and about us and give you a little bit of a daily life of a Peace Corps volunteer. And if you'd be interested in joining after you listen, please reach out. I'll be glad to give you more information about my experience and Indonesia and whatever else you guys would like to hear about.
And I'll echo that as well. And I'll also say that if anyone is actually interested in the organization, we're not affiliated with the organization in any way, shape, or form, but we can absolutely point you in the direction of people who are, if you have any official interest in it whatsoever. So I guess the best way to start is, why did you join? And my story of why I joined is a pretty long one. I'm going to try to cut it down. I've been thinking about how to do this all day. Uh, I joined the Peace Corps when I was 22. I just turned 22. This would have been in 2014. I started the application process, I think, in January of that year. And I was prompted to do it for a lot of reasons. I did my bachelor's and my master's degree in 4 years. So it was coming out of a pretty compressed academic timetable. I was in the middle of a pretty intense program in international security studies in St. Andrews that I loved to bits, but it was very heavy. It was What I was doing was a weird combination of very practical stuff and very theoretical stuff. And it just felt like there was a lot of reading papers about how terrible people were, to be honest.
And just to jump in real quick, St. Andrews is in the UK, right?
Yes, it's in Scotland. It's in
Okay.
Scotland. It's up where they play golf. So
Okay.
yes,
I.
I. So aye, Captain. Um, coming off of that, I knew I wanted to change. I knew I wanted something else than what I was currently doing, and I was kind of on a two. I developed two prongs for myself. I was going to pursue a PhD, or I was going to join the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps seemed natural because I just known so many people who've done it. Um, I I have taught in international schools. My parents were teachers in international schools. A lot of people who work in international schools are Peace Corps volunteers or RPCVs, returned Peace Corps volunteers. Um, and there was also a familial connection. My uncle was a Peace Corps volunteer, I think back in the early 70s, in what was then the UN Trust territory of Micronesia, around Yap. I don't even remember the name of the atoll he was on. But he talked about that extensively. And I think that was really good to have because it wasn't, he often talked about it as one of the most profound experiences of his life, but also one of the most traumatic. Um, he was on an island, no one spoke English. He was kind of useless in that environment because people were basically subsistence farmers, not even farmers, they were mostly fishermen. Uh, as he said, they would always make fun of him because he couldn't catch a turtle with his bare hands. And
I couldn't either, even if it's not
no, but
moving.
I mean that's just everyone's been doing that their whole lives. It's just
Right.
such a different environment, and I think that's of all the Peace Corps stories I've heard, that one was probably the most extreme in terms of you take this kid from, I mean, he was a philosophy major in Southern California, and you throw him into an environment that is just completely alien in like every possible way. And he made it through. He got to close of service. He was there for the 2 years and the 3 months, and he made it back, but like barely, I would say. So I had that, and that was, I think it was good because it made me realize I wasn't signing up for a paid vacation. And that's not what I thought I was signing up for. I knew I needed something different. I wanted to make a difference in the world. And I think this is something I said a lot when I was actually in the Peace Corps. One of the things that you'll find is even the most cynical volunteers, even the people who really don't seem like they're doing anything and they're totally checked out, even those people, there's some element of an idealist.
Hmm.
There's something in them that they really believe in change, or they really believe in possibility. There's a core belief. I've never quite pinned it down, but I really believe that there is something there that does distinguish most volunteers. So that was the background. I guess my sign up process compared to a lot of people was really uneventful. It didn't take me that long. I know yours is much more exciting. Uh, it took me about 9 months from start to finish, basically from uh, talking talking to an interviewer and then getting on the plane, landing in LA. That took about 9 months. Um, pretty straightforward actually. And yeah, I at some point over that summer in 2014, I decided that I didn't want to stay in academia. I'd just finished writing a paper on Indonesia. I was really interested in the place. I really wanted to go there. I'd never really been there. I'd spent like a week in Bali when I was a kid. I really wanted to go out and see it. I was given three options for countries. One was Albania, which ironically I wound up living in years later. One was Albania, one was Indonesia, one was Jamaica. And to me, Indonesia was the obvious pick. I went right for that. I got accepted into the program. Uh, Everything was pretty hunky dory for me, except finally getting the visa, which I'll talk about later. Uh, Tell us about your experience, Dave, because I know it was very different than most people's.
Yeah, so mine was completely different. And I guess a little bit of a background about me. So my parents growing up were both in the military, and I was kind of brought up in an environment where I wanted to do something to serve the country. And for a long time, I looked at joining the military, and kind of as time went on, I thought maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, and I was just always on the fence. But one night in college, I was on YouTube and I found a video called Jimmy Sir. And this is, I think, from the mid 80s. A guy basically made a documentary of his friend serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Nepal. And the guy was hanging out with a bunch of Nepalis and teaching them, I think, science and math and living in a Nepali village. And I saw that and I was like, this is so cool. This guy is living in a foreign country, he's speaking Nepali, and he's building relationships with these people. And I was like, this is what I want to do. So I immediately thought, okay, if I want to do Peace Corps, then how can I make myself competitive? And I'd wanted to do a study abroad for a long time as well. And I'd studied some languages in high school. I studied Spanish and studied Latin for a year as well. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try and do a study abroad, maybe in Spain or in Latin America. And since I wasn't taking any Spanish classes at the University of Utah, they said, oh, you have to either do an intensive summer program, which I did not want to do with faculty, or do Spanish and then study in Spain after. And I ended up thinking, okay, well, that's not what I want to do. I'm going to go to Australia or the UK and study down there. So I studied in Australia primarily to get experience living outside of the US.
Mm.
And it was kind of my first time being out. It was my first time being outside of the country. And I made a bunch of Japanese friends when I was down there. And I started teaching these guys English. So I played on the university baseball team, and I was by far the worst player in terms of baseball skill. But everybody on the team, should say everybody, most everybody was Japanese, and they needed help with English. So it worked out perfectly where I could help these guys learn English. These guys could help me with baseball. It was like the old school Three Ninjas movie, and it was perfect. And it was my first experience teaching English, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So come a couple of years later, I thought, okay, after I graduate from college, I'm actually going to go and teach English for a couple of years. So I went to Korea, taught English over there, and I thought this is a really good way for me to get more experience to serve in Peace Corps. And I always kind of had this long-term goal of serving in Peace Corps after college, but I just wanted to make myself more competitive. So I thought, okay, if I have teaching experience, then that'll help me to get in, and living in a foreign country like Korea or Japan would help me get in as well. So that's kind of what I did. And I just like started taking steps to make that happen. And I initially was supposed to do Peace Corps in Ukraine starting in August 2014. And that did not work out because the initial war in Ukraine started in Crimea and in the Donbass back in early 2014. So I was in limbo for a very long time. And Indonesia was a consolation prize initially, where Peace Corps sent me an email. They said, yeah, you're not going to Ukraine, but we can put you in Indonesia in 2015. And I just held my nose and said, okay, I want to do Peace Corps, so I'll just go to Indonesia. And looking back, I'm so happy I did it. It was one of the best decisions of my whole entire life. And then my visa in Korea was ending and I had a few months off. So I ended up going to Georgia for a couple of months and teaching over there in the meantime. And that was a really cool experience as well. So I guess my experience of going into Peace Corps, I initially was supposed to go to one country, got put into another country, and that used to be really common. And the whole entire process, from what I understand now, has changed. But I think the day-to-day living situation is very similar, where you're still farther out, you're still primarily one of the only Americans or the only American in your community, and you're there to make an impact. Right,
Yeah,
Gavin?
yeah. So I was just I'll go back to sort of my initial, I guess, entrance into the Peace Corps, but just really quickly. So the Peace Corps is an independent agency of the United States government. The people it sends into the field are volunteers. There is a in-country staff of the Peace
Yep.
Corps in every country,
And
but
Yep.
the
And Peace Corps is not affiliated at all with the intelligence community whatsoever. There's a hard line between Peace Corps and intelligence, where a lot of countries, and I had this experience in Indonesia,
oh
they
my
think that
God.
OPC is cover for intelligence, and it's
And,
not. It's
and
completely separate. Our mission is completely separate, and it's a completely separate agency. It's
that's
not even really a government agency. It's more of like an organization.
I mean, I always describe it as a non-governmental governmental organization. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the United States government's development NGO, essentially.
Mhm.
Um, so
That's
yes,
a perfect way of saying it. And it's not part of USAID either. It's completely
no,
separate.
it's completely separate. And there are unfortunately strong historical reasons why that line is there. It wasn't always there. It's definitely there now, 100%. So, uh, yes, so that's the Peace Corps. I think now there's something like 8,500 volunteers in the field.
Mhm.
They're all over the place in many different kinds of countries. I would say I think in every continent except Antarctica, probably. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. They have them in North America, Caribbean, Latin America, South America, Central
Europe,
America,
yeah,
Africa, Europe, and Asia. Central
all
Asia.
over.
Well, I don't think they have them in Central Asia. Well, Kyrgyzstan, yeah. Central Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia.
All over the place. So the work that the Peace Corps does in each country is often very different. In our case, in Indonesia, I think PC Indo still only does English.
Yeah, I think it's education. So Peace Corps has several different sectors, and
Hmm.
we were education volunteers. So our primary job was to help Indonesia and help Indonesian students living in rural environments study English and basically give these guys access to a native teacher and to teaching materials that we can get, but it's harder for the local communities to get. And just
And
give
it's
someone the opportunity to practice and use English with someone who's a native speaker,
and it's
primarily
also
for teachers and also for students.
it's also worth noting here that uh, English is the sort of not unofficial. It is the foreign language that gets taught in schools in Indonesia. Uh, Despite that, it's something that historically the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Religious Affairs, which is also involved in the education sector in Indonesia, has historically struggled with keeping the English language program strong because generally speaking, there are not a lot of English language speakers living in Indonesia. Uh, it has no uh, it has no English colonial history like you would have in India. It was a former Dutch colony. There wasn't a lot of Dutch spoken. The lingua franca was Bahasa Indonesia, which is today the national language. There's not a strong tradition, as there are in other Southeast Asian countries, of a European language being used as the lingua franca. So it's not like Malaysia, where pretty much everyone speaks English to some degree. It's not like the Philippines, where also English is very, very widely spoken. It doesn't have that. That lingua franca was actually a native language. So they were really interested. The government of Indonesia, the Ministry of Education, was extremely interested in bolstering the English language programs again in rural areas. But I mean, we had volunteers in extremely rural areas. We had volunteers in cities.
Mm-hmm.
We had volunteers in suburban areas. We had volunteers really all over the place. The year before we left the program moved to uh, West. Is it West or East? It
It
was
was
East.
NTT, yeah,
NTT.
NTT,
It was NTT, which is Nusa
yeah,
Tenggara,
Nusa Tenggara
which
Timur.
is Timor means east in Bahasa. So they moved the program out there right next to East Timor, which is an independent country. But before that, the program had been entirely restricted to Java. And actually, me and Dave were in two different parts of Java. Dave was in
Oh,
West Java. I was out in East Java. Actually, I was on another island that's a part of East Java province called Madura. But we were both in the Java area. And
mhm,
Java, of course, is the most important part of Indonesia in the sense that most of the people in Indonesia live on Java, and the current political center, but the real sort of economic, political, demographic center of gravity in Indonesia is Java. Uh,
Yep. And I was gonna say real quick too that in Indonesia, if you've been to Bali or you've been to Jakarta or Yogyakarta, and you hear people speaking English. In Indonesia, there are people that speak English, but there's generally a wealth gap. So Indonesians that are more wealthy will generally speak English. Either they've had the ability to take classes from a tutor in Indonesia or from a foreign tutor, or some of them have done study abroad or they've gone to, maybe an international school. But in rural areas, it's very, very hard for Indonesians to get access to English. So the English gap, in my opinion, I think the Indonesian government wants to reduce this English gap so there's more access for information to Indonesians across the whole entire country and give equal and improve economic opportunity for all Indonesians, regardless of where they live.
yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up because I'm sure there are people who are listening who've gone like, well, I've been to Bali and everyone spoke
Yeah.
English.
Yeah.
Bali,
Yeah. If you're in Bali, Bali's an anomaly. It's completely different from the rest of Indonesia in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of development. And there's so much more. It's like going to the EU in a way. I mean, Indonesia is the same size as the distance from the UK to Kazakhstan. And the cultures are probably just as different as well,
oh yeah,
from British culture to Kazakh culture across Sumatra to Papua. So there's so much diversity within this country. And it's like, okay, if you've been to Germany or if you've been to Berlin, that doesn't, I guess equate to going to Italy or going to France. Yes, you've been to Europe, but you haven't been to a bunch of these other places. So if you visited Indonesia and you've been to Bali, there's so many other places that you can check out where you might meet people that don't speak English, and it would give you a completely different perspective and idea and experience of visiting Indonesia.
yeah. So now let's just sort of bring it back down for a little bit. My experience, and I want to hear yours because uh I don't really remember obviously what was going on with you because I don't think I knew you at the time. But
Yeah.
I I'm not going to go into why. I was in Saudi Arabia before going to Indonesia, and I was trying to get PC to fly me because they pay for the plane ticket. I was trying to get them to fly me from Saudi to Indo. And the stumbling block was the Indonesian government did we're basically just said we're not going to let you in if you fly from Saudi Arabia. Why are you coming from Saudi Arabia? You need to be coming from America. You're an American. And I was not happy about this because this meant flying from Dahran. Actually, no, it meant flying from Bahrain to LA, which it, it's like it was over 24 hours. I know that. It was hell. You fly from Bahrain in the middle of the night. I went from Bahrain to Kuwait, Kuwait to DC, DC to LA. I got to LA. I hadn't been in LA in like 15 years at that point, and I had to my bag was an odd shape, so they put it in lost luggage. I had to track it down.
Oh man.
Oh no, it was hell. Like yeah, LAX customer service, maybe it's better now. I doubt it. It was pretty terrible. I had to go and grab this bag. I get a shuttle. Uh, were we at the Holiday Inn? I think we were at the
We
Holiday
were at some airport hotel. It was
Inn.
like
At
a
an
step
airport
above.
hotel.
It
So
was it was a step above like Motel 6 with bars on the window. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it was, not someplace super, super fancy. It
it,
was it
it
was
was like a
decent.
Holiday Inn or a Premier Inn or something like that.
Yeah.
And I get in, and there's someone from the Peace Corps there, and they're like, "You can leave your bag at the reception. We'll deal with it later." Uh, we've started, and I'm like, "Oh shit!" So I really, and it's interesting to hear other people tell this story. I burst in. I hadn't slept at this point in over a day. I burst into
I
this,
remember this. I still remember this.
and they sort of asked me, "Well, you want to say some words?" And I was sort of like, "No, I've just come from Saudi Arabia. I'm really tired, and I don't want to be here." And
Yeah.
boy, talk about making first impressions. There are
Well, no, I
people.
remember I remember that. And you walked in and I literally thought to myself, who the fuck is this guy? Like, what is he doing here?
I think that was a lot of
And
people's
then and then
reaction.
I didn't talk to you the whole entire time until
No,
we got to Beiji. And then I remember when they made our language groups, it was me, you, Keela, and Emily. And I was like, okay, Emily seems cool. Keela seems cool. I was like, fuck, I don't want to be with this guy. Why do I have to be with this guy? They picked the worst person, and this guy is going to live right across from me. I don't want to see this guy every day. Damn it, why?
and, the funny thing is like the only person who is it. Oh my god, the only person who I has a non-negative uh, account of meeting me that first day is Duncan because he was in a different room.
The
So like
dunk.
his and I swear to God, I remember this totally differently. He remembers me walking past him on the plane, and I knew the book he was reading, and I started like just talking to him about the book, and no, no one else knew who the fuck had written this book. So he was impressed by that. But everyone else is like, he came in, he seemed like an asshole. He, you know, clearly uh didn't want to be there. He said he was coming in from Saudi Arabia. No one could figure out what the fuck he was doing here. It was just really, really kind of funny. So that was my introduction to most people. And I think you're right, Dave. I think most people were just like, this guy's up. Because I maintained that attitude for the whole day. I mean, I was just in a terrible
Well,
mood
well,
the whole time.
well, and then the flight over, and then the transit, and then the other transit, and then we get to Indonesia. And I mean, it was a long day for me. For you, it would have been crazy because we got to LA like that afternoon. We had some stuff we did in LA, and then we
We
left
left at
early the
4 in
next
the
morning.
morning.
Yeah, we left early in the morning. We went back
Yeah,
to the airport, and then we flew, through Japan to Indonesia, and we stopped in Singapore. We had to spend the night in the Singapore airport, and that was a fun experience where I basically got detained by Singapore airport security because I didn't have my passport. I
I
was
forgot about it.
walking around at 1 in the morning, and Singapore airport police will sweep the whole entire airport, and they see me. I was with another PCV, and they're like, hi, come over here. I'm like, okay, like, where's your ticket? I'm like, it's in the lounge. And they're like, where's your passport? In the lounge. Why don't you have your passport? Why don't you have your ticket? Oh, because I'm just walking around. Why'd you leave your stuff in the lounge? Oh,
Welcome
'cause
to
I've got friends there.
Singapore.
Yeah. Oh, I got friends there. Okay. Where are you going? Indonesia. Why are you going to Indonesia? Indonesia is dangerous. You're gonna get robbed. You're gonna get sick. All of this stuff. and I'm, telling these guys I'm going to volunteer down there for 2 years. And they just look at me like, you're absolutely nuts. Like, why would you go to Indonesia for 2 years to volunteer? Like, what drugs do you have on you in your system? We're going to do a drug test right now, and we're going to stop you from going because you've got to be high on something. You're absolutely nuts for wanting to go to Indonesia for 2 years to volunteer. And
Yeah.
sure enough, they took me back and then they checked everybody's docs. I mean, these guys were as thorough as can be, as Singapore is, looking through everybody's passport, looking through everything. They're like, oh, maybe it's a bunch of transient Americans hanging out. That's pretty much what we looked like and felt like at this point. It was a pretty rough trip.
I felt very transient at that moment in time. Yeah, so we get in. I think we spent the night in Baja, and then we took a bus.
Yeah, we took a bus to
Took a
Malong.
bus to Malong, and we stayed at the university out there. That was a nice little introduction to Peace Corps living. Four guys in a room, no
Yeah.
AC, getting up very early. Obviously, all the commodes and everything are shared. Um,
Hmm.
you're living a little rough out there, and we're in the middle of a big university up there. Malong, very nice town uh, in
Yes.
in eastern Java, very nice university town actually. And we were up there for what about a week, and then we got assigned to our villages, and that's when I met Dave really, because we were,
Yeah.
as you said, we were living basically next to each other. I was right down the street, and we were never far away. And I mean, for 3 months, pretty much, pretty much every waking moment, I would say, was Dave or Dave adjacent because
Yep. And I mean, it was everything. I mean, I remember the first day we got there, I think
everything.
your host dad, Pop Marcos, gave me and gave you a ride in his car. And Gavin's host family was one of the few families in the area that had a car. So they gave us a ride over there. And then we walked around the area. And then pretty much the whole entire time we were there, like my host family and I think Gavin's host family too, were like, these guys need to basically stick together so they have a friend. And I mean, that's something about Indonesia and Indonesian culture is they want you to have friends. They want you to have relationships with people so you're happy.
Well,
And I
and
was
it's
like, I don't want to be around this guy, but eventually it was like, okay, I don't, I honestly, I don't think had we not been in the same
no,
village, we probably would have never talked to each other.
no, no.
But
I
since we
can't
were, it
imagine.
worked out, and I'm really glad it worked out the way it did.
Well, and
That's an understatement.
oh, thanks, Dave. I mean, I feel that way too, but I also think there's something about that Indonesian attitude that can sometimes be counterproductive, but there is an emphasis on emotional health. I mean, in Indonesian culture, it's really important that you're never alone. And we'd often talk about, when you get a bunch of Americans, and Americans generally are very individualistic, often in ways we don't recognize until we're sort of forced to confront it. Indonesia is not. I mean, obviously, if you go to the big cities, yes, there are a lot of people living their own lives, doing their own thing, but there's a strong sense of collectivity, there's a strong sense of solidarity, and there's a strong sense of communality. Everyone does everything together. So to the people we were staying with, the idea that we would be completely alone ever
Mhm.
was horrifying. And I had to deal with this. I mean, I told you about this, and you had to deal with this as well. Um, Throughout Peace Corps service, the idea of alone time was almost impossible to get across to people
Yeah.
because particularly in rural Indonesian society, it doesn't exist. Like the idea that someone would want to be by themselves, it is kind of horrifying.
And
To
the
the
only
average
way
person living in the desa.
And the only way, I mean, this is probably why I studied Korean in Indonesia so hard, because I wanted to have alone time. And I guess being more introverted, I like being by myself. And if I just told people, I'm studying, then generally they'll leave you alone. It's like, oh, he's busy. But if you're working, it's like, okay, if you're working, you work with somebody else. But if you're
Oh yeah.
studying, you can sit there and kind of study and read by yourself. So it's like really studying and reading are kind of the only individual activities that, people generally do. But still, you shouldn't spend hours and hours and hours doing it. You spend maybe 20, 30 minutes tops. And then it's like, okay, I've got to go and talk to somebody and,
Yeah.
have a copy and recharge.
And,
And it's if you sit there for 2 hours and study like you would, cramming for a test or, doing anything like that, it's just, this is really strange. Why is this guy so interested in this topic?
and
What is he studying so hard about?
the one thing I want to say before we get cut off here is what I failed to realize initially, and it took me 2 years to figure it out, is that those relationships that you build by being with someone all the time, that's the glue. That's what keeps the
Yep.
country together. And those
Yep.
relationships are so important that they do get prioritized over pretty much everything else. And
Yep. And in Indonesia, those relationships are what you want to do anything. If you want to do business, if you want to
it keeps you
travel, if you
alive.
have Indonesian friends. Yep.
Keeps you alive. I mean, it is
Yep.
absolutely the thing. It keeps you in business. It keeps you alive. It keeps you healthy. It keeps you present. And you are going to do everything you can. And you cultivate it in so many ways. And you cultivate it all the time. So this is part 2 of our Peace Score on the Fringe special. I don't know if that's what we're calling it. It seems special. Seems special to me, Dave. Anyway,
Oh, it was a special time in both of our lives.
it usually is. So we were talking, but that is a good segue though, because we were talking about the importance of relationships, and I think both of us learning, because I look back and I was a kid. I mean, I was a very young man, and I learned a lot about the importance and the value of relationships from that experience. Because you'll be in a situation where, like, I don't know you, you don't know me, we don't seem like we have a lot in common. Actually, we had a lot in common, we just didn't know it. And
Hmm.
we're stuck together basically every day for 3 months. And you know what? At the end of those 3 months, I'm like, I'm so happy I was put here with Dave, because a lot of the time it's really proximity has a lot to do with the value and the importance of relationships. Now,
Hmm.
there were people in the exact same situation in the Peace Corps who did not have that experience, who were stuck with people that they hated and grew to hate even more until it developed a white hot pestilential rage. And, and, and there were plenty of people who were forced to spend every waking moment with someone else for 3 months, didn't really fight with the person, and after the 3 months was up, never talked to them again. So there is a spectrum. There's a wide spectrum of how people deal with that situation. But I will say, I think the contrast was stark in terms for us realizing the value of relationships in that environment, because we were both coming from, whether we were aware of it or not, coming from this very Americanized view of the world where you are an individual, you are an island unto yourself. And yeah, maybe you go and visit other people on their islands from time to time, but at the end of the day, you go back to your island, you go back to the castle. And
Yep.
that's just not a thing in it. That's just not a concept. Again, particularly, you have some people in Surabaya, you have some people in Jakarta. I'm sure that they feel like individuals, and you go out. I am not saying they're not individuals in the sense that they don't have an individual personality or a character, or they're not individuals in that sense. 100% yes. But the idea that you do things in isolation by yourself, no, no, no. That's just not a thing. Um, and it, I would say that was actually less in Beiji than when I wound up in Kwanyar and was like, oh, Beiji was kind of like a soft soap version of this. Because in Kwanyar, it was 24/7. Why are you by yourself reading a book? You've been doing that for 2 hours. You need to get out of your room. You need to eat some nasi. You need to talk to someone. Why aren't you talking to more people? So
Yep.
it
And
was
it was the same for me too in West Java. So Indonesia, and I should say, I'll just start with Java. So Java has five primary ethnic groups. So there are Javanese, there are Sundanese, there are Orang Banten, there are Maduris as well, and then you have Cirebon, which is kind of a mixture of Javanese and Sundanese. And then if you go to other parts of Java, you have some other Balinese maybe around Banyuwangi.
yeah,
And then Jakarta is just a huge melting pot of the whole entire country. It's like New York, except it's Indonesia's New York, where you have people from all over Indonesia living in Jakarta. So you have people from Sumatra all the way to Papua living in their largest city. It's like got over 20 million people in the metro area. It's a huge, huge city. And it's a city that a lot of people don't think about as being very multi-ethnic or multicultural, but it really is
it
just
really
because
is.
Indonesia is so multi-ethnic and multicultural. But I will echo Gavin in that when I was living with my host family would always be wondering, hey, what are you doing by yourself? Go ride your bike, to my friend's cafe or to the beach. Do you want to go with somebody else? Or, are you going to meet somebody down there? And usually I would meet one of my friends or meet somebody down there. And they were very relieved. It was just, okay, I'm not going to go and spend the day by myself. I'm going to spend the day with somebody else. And for them, if you have a friend or if you have somebody that you can talk to, then you have love. And if you're sitting there by yourself, it's like you must be lonely. You must want to talk to somebody. And the Indonesian person will think, I want to go and try to be friends with this person. This person's from far away, and this person is a foreigner here. And, I just want to check on, see how they're doing. Are they hungry or do they want to have a friend? And you meet Indonesians and you're traveling in Indonesia outside of the tourist areas, people are incredibly friendly because they just want to be friends with you. They want to talk to you and get to know you. And they're just curious in general. And a lot of it's not negative in terms of wanting things. It's just more, I want to get to know you and I want you to be, I guess a part of my life either for today or, potentially in the future, but they want to build a relationship with you and get to know you. The whole entire society down there is much more relationship based than it is in the US, where we're much more, I would say, transactional or I don't know how you would call it,
I,
but
I would say
it's
transactional and individualistic.
yeah, individualistic probably
Maybe leave it
better.
at that.
You've
I
got a
mean,
bunch of different operating systems in the US. Everybody runs their own individual operating system. In Indonesia, there's a much more shared operating system, even though there are huge differences with how people act.
oh my God, yeah. And just yeah, I mean, just to echo like the utter horror that the idea of someone wanting to be alone would just elicit from people. And so something I would say also about if you go to Indonesia and if you go anywhere outside of the main tourist spots, you will probably have tons of people coming up to you. And even the thing that I find most negative, which is they're going to want to take a picture with you. That's actually coming from a very I would say good place, in that they're not, for some people you are just an object, to be frank. For a lot of people it's more like they they want to show everyone that they know someone from outside.
Yeah. Well, and they want to remember you too.
And they do want to remember you. And they, it's a culture with an interesting relationship to memory, and it's a culture with an interesting relationship to memorials. And I remember the first time I was in the teacher's lounge and someone was passing the phone around with pictures of a car accident that had happened. And I mean, a really horrible car accident. People were dead, there were bodies on the ground, and they're showing it to everyone. And I'm like, why would you show this to your coworkers? And it's like, well, we want you to know that it happened. And it's in a really weird way, it's sort of showing communal affection. This terrible thing has happened. It's going to affect everyone because it's a small village. You need to know. And you need to know it's really bad.
Yeah. Well, and too, that shows you're part of the group, that they want to include you in the group
You're in the in group
because they're showing you.
You're in the in group. So, there would be all of these things. And again, I say this with the benefit of hindsight. At the time, I'm just going like, the fuck is wrong with these people? Like, seriously. In hindsight, I'm like, oh no, they're including me in the group. This is a part of the group dynamics. And that, looking back on it, I go, that's like all of this stuff that I took like personally and in the wrong way. And honestly, some of it I was right to take personally and in the wrong way. But a lot of it is just they're trying to assimilate you into the community. And that process is not always going to be smooth. That process.
No, well, 100%. It's tough because it's so different. And if you live with an Indonesian host family, and in Peace Corps in Indonesia, you have to live with a host family for the entire 3 months of training, and then the 2 years that you're actually serving as a Peace Corps volunteer. Some countries you can live by yourself, you can have an apartment, or you live with other Peace Corps volunteers. In Indonesia, you have to live with a family. And that makes a huge difference in terms of you understand Indonesian culture and you learn the language quicker. And it also makes it much harder for you because you have to give up so many things that you take for granted. The biggest thing that I think I took for granted was my independence.
Oh yeah.
And my host mom would come into my room at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning and flip the light on and wake me up right after the mosque would have their first call to prayer. And she'd come in, she'd grab my laundry, and she'd go and start washing my clothes. And I told her every single day for almost 2 years that I can wash my own clothes, and that, you don't have to come in at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll bring them out or I'll wash my clothes. And she just would not take that for an answer. It's like, no, you're living with us. And I kind of took it as a sign of disrespect. But looking back, she was trying her best to take care of me in a way that she knew how to take care of me. And she was doing her very best to make sure that she was the best host mom that she could be. And it was the same for my other host mom too in training. And if you meet Indonesians, they'll do the same thing when you go to a restaurant and you eat. They'll always offer you more food and go, oh, tambah lagi, which is like, take more, take more, take more. And they're doing it because they want you to be happy. They want you to be well fed. And they want you to have a very, very good overall experience of being in the country and have good memories of the place and of the people.
Well, it's also,
It's not out of spite and to say, oh, that we're basically bossing you around. So that this is what we know is comfortable, and we want you to be as comfortable as you can be.
it's it's a way of expressing affection is really what it is. And Indonesians are just like some of the most warm-hearted people you've ever met. But it's intimidating when you drop these people into their house that they can't really communicate with, that their needs seem to be different in some way that you can't comprehend. And so you latch on to, I can't tell Dave he's going to be okay, but I can do his shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Yep, I can give him food. I can do all of these basic necessities that
yeah,
he's going to need to take care of him.
yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a country that has had a really rough, really violent history uh, of people being deprived of a lot of basic needs. So, and in the community that I was living in, I think probably in Dave's community as well, you were living with people who had direct lived experience of famine, of warfare, of just massive civil and economic unrest. I mean, every disruptive thing that you could imagine, every disruptive world event that you could imagine had happened to these people, often multiple times within one generation.
Mm-hmm.
So these were people who were used to being in a state of scarcity, being in a state of desperation. And I think it goes right back to the importance of relationships in that culture, where for a lot of people, having solid community bonds is what had kept them alive. And the emphasis on community, the emphasis on being part of something that was bigger than any individual was so strong because it had literally kept all of these people alive. If you
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that in Indonesia in the 20th century, chances are you didn't make it. So many things happened. The experience of Dutch colonialism, which kind of got worse and worse and worse at the early part of the 20th century, the Japanese invasion during World War II, which was terrible, the Dutch reinvasion in 1945, which continued for about 6 years, all of these horrible events. Then the first couple of years of Indonesian independence are extremely touch and go. Those are the 50s. That's everything's up in the air. No one really knows what's going on. The 60s, the first couple of years are even more chaotic. Then you have brutal military dictatorship for basically the next 35 years. And that
Yep.
brings a really what I would describe as kind of a terrible stability, um, which was extraordinarily devastating, a sort of stagnancy, really. And then in the 90s, when Suharto finally goes, again, the chasm sort of opens up and people are flung back into this really terrible uncertainty. My community, I was living in Madura. All the people I was living with were Maduris. I was living with many people who'd had to flee Borneo. There had been a large migration program bringing economic migrants into Borneo from Madura. That kind of went sour in the 90s. There were issues with the indigenous groups or the indigenous ethnic groups in parts of Borneo. And basically, a civil war broke out in Indonesian Borneo, which is not often talked about. But literally, hundreds of thousands of people had to flee. Many of them went back to Madura. I was living with a lot of those people. So, dealing with that trauma and dealing with the fact that solidarity, communal values, having these shared relationships, that's what kept you together. That's what kept you there. So the idea
Mm-hmm.
that you would show
Well,
up,
and I'm I'm going to
Sorry,
jump
no,
in
go
real
ahead.
quick. So echoing kind of that same thing. So the area where I was in Pangandaran in West Java on the very south coast used to be a big tourist hotspot for Indonesia. They tried to turn it into, I guess, the Bali of West Java. And prior to 1997, it was a very, very happening tourist area. And you still have a lot of hotels, you have a lot of restaurants, you have a lot of tourist infrastructure that was built up. And then in 1997, there was a big financial crisis in Southeast Asia, and it decimated the value of the Indonesian currency, where it basically lost half of its value in days. So people lost their whole entire livelihoods and the whole entire tourism industry. This was the main industry in the whole entire region, dried up. So the entire community was like, well, now we've got nothing. We've built all this infrastructure. We have virtually nothing now to keep our livelihoods together. So we've got to band together to get through this. And it was a very, very trying and challenging time from talking to my community and school and people in the area. But at the same time, like it changed the whole entire fabric of the society in Pangandaran. And then you had a tsunami as well that hit. I can't remember what year it was. I think it was 2010. There was a tsunami that hit southwest Java and it killed several people. And there were just bodies, from what I remember, and telling me bodies of people on the beach. And it was absolutely destructive and it scared the whole entire community. And you have events like this too that just they bring the whole entire community together where it's horrible, but you have relationships that are built through horrible experiences that make these relationships possible.
Well, an interesting example of that was one of my neighbors in Kwanyar was actually he his wife was not Madurese, his wife was Achenese, and he'd met her because he was a volunteer rescue person during the 2004 tsunami. And he had gone, I think he'd like signed on to the Navy on a short term contract, and they'd gone out and they were fishing people out of the water. And he literally he was there for a couple of months. They were fishing bodies out. This was 2004. They were fishing bodies out for months. Um,
Uh,
and he I think helped rebuild Banda Aceh. He was there for a while, and he met his wife that way. So yeah, they really do bring the community together in interesting and odd and funny ways. I there was a train of thought that I was going to go on prior to what you said, which really was on point. Um, yeah. Oh, I know what it was. So you have
yeah.
this like real emphasis on community and shared values, and then you have people parachuted in who seem to spend all of their time subtly rejecting these bonds in various ways. And a lot of these communities kind of don't know how to deal with that. Um, it it's difficult too because you know if you're a Peace Corps volunteer and you're put in a locality and you just straightforwardly reject local values, you're not going to last very long. It's not going to happen. I don't care where you are. You could be in Macedonia, you could be in Madagascar, you could be in Micronesia. If you go into the community and you go, oh, you're doing everything wrong. If you
Mhm.
last, it'll be a miracle, and you shouldn't last because
No.
that's not an
Well, yeah, you shouldn't
attitude.
even you shouldn't be in there in the first place. I'd
Shouldn't
say
be
there was
there.
one guy in training that did not make it through, and I mean he kind of pushed himself out. But
Those
generally,
people do self-select.
if people are more closed-minded they will get into a situation in Indonesia and they'll go, this is not for me. Or in, Macedonia or Mongolia or Kyrgyzstan or wherever, and go, this is not for me. And I can't do this, or I'm not willing to do this. And there's absolutely no problem. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I
No,
have
but
to I
it's
and
not the
I
experience for
have
you.
to I have to look back because the first 6 months I was in Peace Corps, we lost a lot of PCVs. And for a while, I thought, oh, these people are weak. These people are not good at what they do. They must, not know the language, or they must not know something. And it's like, no, Dave, you're completely wrong. These people just recognize that this is not working out for them. And ultimately, if you're in Peace Corps, you need to be there for the right reasons. And if you're not there for the right reasons, then you're doing the right thing by going, this is not for me, and finding something and doing something that's better. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with going, hey, this isn't for me. I tried it for 3 months or 6 months or a year and a half, and this just isn't working. I've got to take care of my health or my future, whatever that is, and go and make the most of your experience and try do the best that you can. But the important thing is that you did try. You showed up and you did something that very few people are actually willing to do. And hats off to you for doing that.
Yeah, and honestly, so many of those people who left, when I think about it, uh, a lot of them did a lot of shit, to be honest.
Yes, they did.
I'm
Yes,
not,
they did.
I'm talking about Jesus. Jesus, Dave, you know how to bring a conversation down. So, but they did.
Davy Downer.
Davy the Downer. Um, they did do a lot of good things for the community. They spent a lot of time creating those relationships and like really helping people out. And yeah, I think I had a similar attitude. I would say like definitely the first year where I'm just like weak. You're weak. And man, what a stupid way of looking at things. I mean, honestly, I look back and I'm embarrassed. Um,
Yeah. Well, I am too. I am 100%. I'm like,
yeah.
dude, Dave, you're so fucking full of shit. You had no idea what you were even doing.
Well,
You're
and
just green.
not
You're
only
completely green. You're young and naive. You're
yeah,
naive.
yeah, and that's why I look back and I'm like, I was young, I was really stupid. I mean, and I'll be honest, and we've had this conversation before, so this is not going to come as a shock. But like, I think there was a point, maybe a year, 6 months, year, 8 months in, where I feel like it probably wouldn't have been a bad idea for me to leave, and I didn't because I was so determined to stick it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back and I go, I'm kind of glad that I did, but I also like was not good long term. It was not a good decision. Uh, and it was sort of an example of the stubbornness about, no, I'm going to see it out, which can be a good quality, but sometimes you just have to admit this thing isn't working for me. It's not working for the people around me. And you're there to help the people around you. That's why you're
Mm-hmm.
there. And if you can't
Yep.
do that, you're making 100% the right decision for everyone.
Yep. I agree. And I think too, I mean, we kind of touched on this. The reason why you're there as a Peace Corps volunteer is to help the country that you're in with a problem that they saw that they need to solve. And Indonesia's primary problem that it wanted Peace Corps to help them solve was English education. And if you think that, okay, I tried my best and I'm not the best person to solve this problem, absolutely nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. You went in there, you did the best that you could, and you're going off to do something else. And you're opening up a door to someone that can come in and say, okay, now I can give this problem a shot. And you're continuing to help the program and continuing to help the people of Indonesia solve that problem because it's not going to be solved by one person. The key to Peace Corps is that goal should be to build relationships with people and to plant seeds. It shouldn't be to show up and say, oh, I'm going to change this country and rebuild the school's education system or develop the curriculum. It should be, I'm going to give these people confidence and do something that's sustainable. And the S word is something that we heard every single day in Peace Corps. But if you build up something and then you leave, it's going to fall apart. Your job first and foremost should be build relationships and do something that's going to be lasting, so then those people can take the matter into their own hands and solve the problem. Like, you're not there to solve the problem, the local people have to be the ones that solve the problem.
I always felt the
And I
best
think that's
way.
what we get so wrong with Peace Corps,
Yeah.
is that we show up, like I showed up the first 3 months or 4 months and thought, I'm going to change this community, and I wanted to do a beach cleanup the first 3 months I was there. Talked to my school. Yes, we're all on board. Well, I show up to go and nobody's there. So I go pick up trash, go to school on Monday. And I was talking to Gavin about this yesterday, that, yeah, basically they did not see it as being critical to them. They had something else going on. Maybe it was scouts, maybe it was a wedding, maybe it was a circumcision party. It was something else going on that was more important than the beach cleanup. And if I go and I try to do this beach cleanup is not going to last. Be much better off engaging with the local people and finding out what they actually want to do to help their community, instead of showing up and being the American expert that shows up, does something, and then skips town.
Well, and yeah, I mean, a savior complex will get you nowhere real fast. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, well, no, again, in any environment, it's just going to fuck you over in the end. I mean, I feel like the best way, or maybe not the best way of describing a Peace Corps volunteer, but the best possible outcome for a Peace Corps volunteer is you create a program that makes your presence unneeded.
Mm-hmm.
If
You're
you,
trying to work yourself out of a job.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I always very cynically I say, that's why I was such a terrible English teacher, because I want to keep working. Yeah, if I'm really good at my job and everyone speaks wonderful English, it's no more work. It's no
Mm-hmm.
good. So, but honestly, in the Peace Corps, I really think that's the aim. You're supposed to help people get the resources that they need to deal with the problems that they've identified. And that model, there's something about that model of development that still, even though I've seen every possible flaw that you could see in it, that's still very attractive uh, when it's implemented correctly. And of course, it isn't always. And there are flaws with the original idea, I would say. But there is something at the core of it that is very idealistic, that is kind of romantic, sort of in the big R romantic sense. Uh, there is something to the idea of the Peace Corps that was attractive to me, and that I think makes it an attractive model of development for a lot of people. But everyone winds up in a different situation. And I think what a lot of people find very quickly is, if you thought you were going to show up and there were going to be big dramatic changes, that's not generally how it works. And usually, if you show up and there are big dramatic changes, they're not good.
Yes,
They're
definitely.
good. If you,
It's something has generally gone very wrong.
yes, yes, uh, things have gone very wrong. Various law enforcement agencies have been notified, and you are looking at a best case scenario of a one-way ticket back to Palookaville.
Yeah, you need to get on that flight and skip town.
And I know people that happened to.
Yeah.
I know people that happened to, uh, and often through no fault of their own. But yeah, I mean, you hear some crazy stories. The craziest stories I heard. Well, now I heard some pretty crazy ones about people in Indo. But you know, I heard ones about people in the Pacific getting arrested for one thing or another. I mean, you just hear all kinds of wild things. And look,
Yeah,
it attracts a wide spectrum of individuals. And it really does.
it does.
It does.
It really does.
Yeah.
Gavin, I was going to say, on the topic of stories, share one quick story.
Hmm. I'll
How
share.
much, how much time do we have left?
We have like 6 minutes. I'll share the classic one.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this was towards the end of my service. This must have been 17. So there was a terrorist attack in Jakarta. Some traffic cops were shot. It was kind of big news because at that point there really hadn't been any major terrorist activity, in certainly not in Jakarta. And I was at school that day, and my school days were best case scenario. I had one or two classes. I was co-teaching. Uh, Generally, I had no classes, and I was just really drinking coffee and on my phone most of the day. So I get called into the principal's office, which doesn't happen. And the principal and I, you know, I get sort of pulled out for like parades and campaign speeches. I'm not really. I'm just sort of the
Not literal, not literally. Please don't take that literally.
yeah. Please don't take that. so, so uh, I get pulled into the principal's office, and okay, just I notice that there are about three men in army uniform sitting on the couch, and they of course are eating satay, which was the specialty of my town. We were famous for our satay. So they're eating satay, and someone's bringing them tea, and it's sort of like, well, we're very. You need to know that the Indonesian government is very concerned with all foreigners living in the country. We want to make sure that you have a trouble-free stay. And this is about 4 months before I'm going to leave, so I'm like, okay, this is all very interesting. And they said, you know, and I was a little alarmed by this until I realized that it was the Indonesian military, so I didn't have anything to worry about. They were like, we're going to have men around every corner. We're going to have men following you to and from school. I lived 100 meters away from school. We're going to have, you know, men under every bush making sure that nothing happens to you. Well, we've been trying to contact this other foreigner in the village, but we haven't found him yet. I said, there's another foreigner in the village. They said, oh yeah, you know, he walks everywhere apparently. He's from Saudi Arabia. And I went, does he wear glasses and have a beard? And they were like, yeah. And it was me because I told some people I'd flown in from Saudi Arabia, as I'd said, and I made the mistake at the time my family was living there. I'd made the mistake of telling people that my family lived in Saudi Arabia, which could only mean that I'm from Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, I was the Saudi Arabian gentleman who walked everywhere that they were looking for. And I was informed that I comprised the entire, it was a district of like 150,000 people. I comprised both foreigners living in this district. And I would be, I think the word they used was I would be chaperoned around the district to prevent terrorist attacks on my person. Um, which thank God that didn't happen. But it was, yeah, I mean, that's just one of so many stories. I mean, there was also, speaking of identity, there was another story of me. I walked all the time. I would take these long, rambling walks into the country. And one evening, you know, the sun is just starting to set, and I'm sort of turning back. There was just this massive expanse of rice field stretching basically from the back of back of the village, which was on the ocean. I mean, these rice fields stretch back for probably 50 kilometers. It was kind of incredible. Um, I'm turning around to walk home, and these old ladies are coming back from the field. They're going home too. And one old woman just stops, looks at me, shuffles forward, comes up to me, pokes me in the arm, pokes me again, pokes me a third time, and then in Indonesian goes, "Oh, you're not a ghost," and then just walked past me. And I mean, we'll probably talk about that later, but the the uh, belief in ghosts and demons and the supernatural world, uh, particularly where I was living, was ever present. And it was actually I kind of learned a lot from living in a community where those beliefs were very upfront. No one was trying to hide them, but I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't
don't even get me started on the Monday morning flag ceremonies on the upacara. And
next time. But I didn't realize until later the reason she thought I was a ghost is because that I was walking on the old Dutch railway,
mm,
and she thought I was one of the guys who'd been killed working on that railway. Um, but yeah, I'll always remember that. Oh, I guess you're not a ghost. That was very, very interesting. But I mean, that was Indo.
all right,
Oh,
so we're back. We are finishing this up really quick. We're going to be done in about 3 more minutes. So, Gavin, go ahead and finish your story real quick. Walking on the railroad track in Madura.
oh, I mean, I had so many stories of walking on that railroad track. I mean, there was the one time I was in the middle of a thunderstorm, and my glasses were useless because it was raining so hard. I decided I was going to walk home, which was filled with snakes. The whole field was filled with snakes. I decided I was going to walk home through the field, which had already flooded up to my knees, so I could barely touch bottom. These are all rice fields. The only solid thing I could get my feet on was a railroad line, which, of course, if you're a tall guy walking through a rice field on a railroad line in the middle of a lightning storm, you should be rethinking some of your life choices. Uh, I know I did. That was one story. The number of times I saw like full on mongoose snake battles going on along that line. Um, the time I like there was one week where I just spent like 7 hours a day in one of the huts overlooking the rice field reading books on my Kindle. That was one summer. So many stories. I probably walked that line every single day I was in the village. Um, so many stories. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many stories from Peace Corps generally, and half of
Yeah,
them I've forgotten at this point.
yeah, I know. I'm with you. I wish I would have written more of them down because when you're there, you're like, oh, I'll remember this forever, and you
Oh,
end up forgetting a lot of this
I
stuff.
did write them down. I did write them down, and then I destroyed all of those journals, which honestly, probably not the worst thing I ever did.
Come on.
Some of it was good, but most of it was not.
Yeah. All right. I'll end with a really quick one about the cat and the scratch and the rabies
Oh
shots.
yeah, can't scratch fever. Let's go, Dave.
Okay. All right. So if you are in Peace Corps, you're going to have to answer to PCMO, the Peace Corps Medical Office, regardless of where you live or regardless of where you do Peace Corps. And one night I came back from the gym. It was probably 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. So my host family in Indonesia, primarily, people get home before Maghrib. So it's about 5:45 to 6 o'clock. It's the prayer right at sunset, people will generally go home, they'll eat in the villages, and then they'll pretty much stay around the house for the evening. I would usually go work out in the afternoon and then come back at night. And I came back this day and I'm walking through the gate at my host family's house, and there's a good old feral cat. This cat was always in our house. She was running around. She was kind of patchy and she was not very nice, but I stepped on her. And I would not be very happy if somebody stepped on me, and she was not happy at me whatsoever. So she bit my foot and scratched me. And I looked down, I was like, ah, shit. Well, I guess I'm going to call PCMO, because PCMO said if you get attacked by an animal or anything like that, you have to call them. So I called them and they said, you're going to have to go and get rabies shots. And I'd had rabies shots prior. I got rabies shots in Georgia. There were a lot of rabid dogs and stuff like that over there. So I'd had my full course, but Peace Corps did not care. They said, you've got to get up early tomorrow and take the bus up to the hospital and get rabies shots. So I did. And I ended up spending a week in Bandung getting rabies shots again. And it was a joy. And I'm not a big fan of needles, but the air conditioning was worth it for a couple of days. And looking back, that cat was always around my host family's house. And generally in Indonesia, if you live in a village, you're going to have animals and critters and stuff like that around you all the time. And I had lizards in my room. I was in the Mondi one time and I had a lizard fall down right next to me as I was taking a bath, taking a bucket bath. And if I would have been using the toilet, everything would have come out like ridiculously fast. It literally scared the shit out of me. But you've
Thank you,
got
Dave. That's a very
you've got
graphic
yeah.
description. Thank you.
I know. I'm sorry. We're going Peace Corps mode here. Everything is a little bit graphic down in Indonesia, and you just kind of get used to talking about stuff that generally you don't really want to talk about, but just kind of comes
I
out.
don't know what it is. I mean, I used to think it was just Peace Corps, but now I'm convinced. I don't know what it is, but the second you take Americans abroad, all they
Yeah,
do is talk about their bowel movements.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's kind of remarkable.
It is.
But yeah, I mean,
We're a weird bunch.
we're an odd bunch, I'll tell you what. So, but I mean, you have,
But
I
yeah, so I
know,
ended up.
you told me, you have other fantastic Peace Corps medical stories, as
I
do
do.
I,
And I
as
would
do
love to
I.
share them with you guys, but this has been a lot longer than we expected. We thought this was going to be like 45 minutes. It's been 80 something. I'm sure everybody is
We should really
tuned
know
out
better
by
at this
now and they're not
point.
going to hear any of
Yeah,
this. So if you stuck
yeah.
around this long, thank you very much. We appreciate your
Terima
ears.
kasih.
Terima kasih
Makasih.
banyak teman-teman. Sampai jumpa lagi. We're done. Thank you.
Ciao.